Hello and welcome to the weekly commodity market update. I'm your host, Brownfield anchor Will Robinson, joined as always by the University of Missouri's Ben Brown. But not
How
not
did that taste? How did that taste coming out of your mouth, Will, after you talked to Scott on Friday?
well. See, that's the thing. I got caught up. So for those of you watching this week's program, go back and watch last week's weekly livestock market update, which normally is done by Megan Grebner and Scott Brown. So now I have to make sure I'm in the right headspace for the crop side of things with little brother Ben here. So
Yeah, it was almost kind of like I'm a big basketball fan, as you probably know. And so it's almost like when the NBA and college basketball announcers switch places for a couple of games during the season. That's kind of what it felt like a little bit.
yeah, but also something different this week from I guess normal is you're in California. You're out there in wine country enjoying a lot of the produce.
Yeah, no, we had a wedding out here for a couple of friends, and so I decided to come out and spend a little vacation. Never been to Northern California before, so taking the chance while I had it.
All right. Well, looking at the markets, hopefully they're the same there as they are here. Can you give me an update on what we saw from the past week?
Yeah, so sure can. So mostly a lot of commodities down. We're normally taking prices from Monday, but since the markets were closed on Memorial Day, we're taking the prices as of this morning, and most of the commodities are sharply down. We'll talk more about that as we go through. But old crop corn for July down 26 cents to 7.60. New crop corn down 25 cents to $7.14 on the week. Old crop July soybeans for July down up 9 cents to $16.96. New crop soybeans in November up 4 cents to 15.22. Looking at those different components, soybean oil down 2 cents per pound to 78.4 cents per pound. Soybean meal was down $2.60 per short ton to $419.90 per short ton. And then the July wheat contract down 88 cents to $11.02.
Well, just on that real fast, talking about the soybean oil market, that'll be interesting to watch this week. I think where we're seeing crude oil prices move higher, so I kind of wonder if that won't pull soybean oil with it as we look at EU increasing ban talks on Russian oil products. But
I expect it will. To answer your question, I'm expecting, yes, soybean oil to move higher.
so one of the things that you said you want to dive into today, obviously you're out there in California with a lot of different not different, same technology, but maybe more usage than we see in the Midwest, electric vehicles, and how that really plays a role within the market and setting the tone for some of the biofuels and things like that. So really give me an overview. What are we seeing right now in the United States on maybe a shift on technology use?
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right. So, in the Midwest, when I see a Tesla on I-70, I usually get real curious, and I'm curious where they're going or where they're coming from, how long they're driving. Mostly, we just don't see a lot of Teslas on the interstate. We're starting to see more and more in Columbia, Missouri, as I drive around. But certainly, it's not something that you see readily across the countryside. I was in Lone Jack, Missouri, which is a small town in western Missouri, and they had Tesla charging stations as well. We have one in my hometown of Appleton City of 1,000 people. So, it's a growth and a technology that's growing. One of the things that has struck me is this whole debate around electric vehicles and potential threat against ethanol consumption, right? So if we think about these two markets are very similar in nature, both had the technology there for a longer period of time than what readily got adopted by the market. There was a high oil price shock in 2005, 2007 period that really got Congress and the US government thinking about energy independence. And that's what led to some of our renewable fuel policy that we have today, right? So like it was a way to increase corn usage, but also a way to decrease our reliance on international oil and cheapen gas prices, right? That's what kind of led to this big boom in ethanol. We're seeing a very similar thing now with electric vehicles and the talk around high oil prices potentially for the long term as we look at this conflict in Ukraine with Russia. More countries, including the European Union, now banning oil out of Russia and looking for other sources, causing energy prices to rise. So very similar path to development between the two markets. And so certainly we've seen some uptick The extent to which electric vehicle adoption affects U.S. motor fuel consumption and ethanol depends very much on the inventory of electric vehicles relative to internal combustion engines in the fleet, right? And so that's the question: is how fast do we turn over the U.S. fleet down the road, right? And I think. Yeah, I think that's the question. Right now the average car in the US stays in the fleet for about 12 to 14 years. Now, my family, we have an old beat up truck that we feed cattle with every day from 1980. So clearly more than 12 years. But, these fleets, we're selling about 16 to 18 million internal combustion engines a year. And we expect those to be in the fleet for another, decade plus. And so there is, that's the big question. But certainly, I don't think it's anything that is going to turn over quickly. Certainly, high oil prices encourage that. But
well, talking about that encouragement, I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of what's going on right now within the vehicle market, because you see this almost stretch of increased incentive and then change in technology, and I almost equate that to looking at like rural broadband. Because once the pandemic rolled around, a lot more people working from home, and a lot of companies now are going full remote or semi-remote. So that's incentivizing broadband to be, stretched out into more places. Well, similarly, we're seeing within the fuel market, obviously gas prices are extremely high right now. I have I'm a Ford Taurus, and it's costing me almost $70 to fill it up. Whenever during the pandemic it was around 30 or 35 or in that range. So it's almost like the stretch, we're hitting this painful kind of incentive, and now we're going to maybe see that shift trickle down in following years.
Yeah, no. So out here in California, we're staying on a working dairy operation. That's just how the people we found, and they own a Tesla. They own an electric vehicle here on this farm. And it kind of struck me because I tend not to see much integration with electric vehicles within the rural countryside in the Midwest. But out here, they're not growing corn. And so they're, more accepting of some of this technology that you're talking about. When we talk to them about it, they're like, it's the cheapest vehicle we can buy, or cheapest, newest vehicle, right? And I think that's going to become the storyline as we move forward over the next decade, there's not only this penalty to driving an internal combustion engine, maybe due to high oil or high gas prices, but we're quickly coming up on a period where it's electric vehicles are cheaper to make, and therefore people are finding an incentive to buy electric vehicles over internal combustion engines because they're cheaper. Now, I don't want to sit here and say that this is going to be the best option for everybody. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying the economic incentives are starting to line up to where not only is the gas penalty high, but also, the gas price high for internal combustion engines at the moment, but it's also becoming cheaper to buy electric vehicles.
Well, and I guess to relate it directly back to ag and really to the Midwest, how does that trickle into biofuels and looking at biodiesel and ethanol? What kind of implications does that have for those markets?
Yeah, so our FAPRI estimates for ethanol production over the next decade do show a slight decline, and that's without any change in policy. So we're still expecting or anticipating the same RFS that's in place today. And I'm not saying the RFS is going to get substantially changed. I'm just saying that's how we do our estimates. And given that and understanding that, we do show a slight decline in ethanol production over the next decade. A couple of major threats to the ethanol on the demand side is just fuel efficiency. Fuel vehicles are becoming extremely more efficient. Today, we're seeing new cars being able to go anywhere between 40 and 50 miles per gallon, some a lot higher than that. 15 years ago, we were pretty happy with 20 miles to the gallon. And there's some vehicles still being sold today that, are getting 18 to 22 miles per gallon. So fuel efficiency has just gotten a lot better. And we expect that. The other thing that you hit on the head earlier in this broadcast, Will, is with people working remotely, right? I contend to believe that, 20, 30 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to notice a very strong break pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in terms of the amount of fuel consumed in a year by people driving to and from work. I think the pandemic has taught us in some cases that people are enjoy working from home, but probably more so what it's done is it's allowed businesses to hire people in locations elsewhere in the country and work for that company just logging in on their computer, right? And so I think our transportation fuel use is going to decline as well as we look over the next few years, just because people, maybe are working from home, or maybe they're working remotely from a company. And certainly I think that has negative impacts. The positive side here for ethanol consumption is we do anticipate that ethanol export demand will pick up, and that other countries will import more US ethanol over the next decade.
Well, and it's interesting there too, because ethanol, it seems like even as EVs, electric vehicles, kind of grow in market share, kind of get more reach, that the market overall for biofuels, you don't imagine that would just disappear, especially in a short term kind of setting, because things like aviation fuels. I mean, how scary would that be, that if you're in a plane that was fully electric powered? I mean, I'd be a little bit nervous. I don't fly off it, but I'd be a little bit nervous, like, oh, we have a dead battery. What's this mean? Well, it means we're going down,
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's even hard to imagine a plane that heavy with that many batteries would
What
be
would be
able
able
to
to
take off,
be able to
right?
even, yeah, lift off. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think so. This conversation has kind of pivoted a little bit into the renewable diesel space, right? Like this is where I think the energy and the excitement around renewable diesel is coming from. Is you're not likely going to be able to electrify an airplane, and you're not going to be able to electrify an ocean liner or a major ocean going vessel, and that's where this renewable diesel, I think, space is that's got people excited as we look to that in the future. So ethanol is one of those things that our view of it here in the United States is certainly going to be there. We're still going to consume ethanol because, as I've mentioned, it takes a while for this fleet to turn over, and people are going to still can use it in their gas mileage. But we're probably going to export a lot more of it than what we are now, and depend on that export market to prop up some of the profitability for ethanol production. I think domestically, and this is what you were getting at, domestically, the excitement is probably going to shift away from ethanol into these other spaces like renewable diesel, which can be made from corn and corn byproducts, but is probably most likely going to be made from soybeans and canola oil here in the United States, just because that's the cheapest readily available source. But yeah, certainly that's, I think, the attention here in the United States.
Well, and going back to one of the things you talked about on maybe what causes some slowness of adoption in the Midwest on technologies like that, it seems odd that a corn grower would use, an electric vehicle to an extent, but then also there's the concern that, well, this isn't a technology that we know can get the job done as far as the amount of power that it provides, and hauling grain, and really, because it takes a lot of horsepower to do all these things that farmers have to do on a daily basis. So is there somewhat of a gap there, you think, between the adoption within the Midwest?
Absolutely right. Absolutely. It's my job to be curious about these markets, right? Like my job is to think about, these crazy ideas that concern people, and people would sit out there and say, oh, that'll never happen, right? This is my job to figure out what the impact of those are. And, I've had a lot of conversations with farmers around Missouri and in different states in the Midwest as well about this whole notion of electric vehicles, primarily from the standpoint of, like, it's not a, hey, this is coming, we need to be aware from it, just kind of talking to them about their feelings about electric vehicles. And some of the things that pop up, or some of the statements are, how in the world, if our electrical grid can't survive a winter storm in Texas, how in the world are we going to power electric vehicles? There's big concern around, you still have to produce that electricity somewhere, right? So the carbon intensity score of producing electricity versus the carbon intensity score of growing corn, like, what does that look like, right? And so we're working on those. I don't have all those answers, and I'm certainly, willing to follow whatever, the data points out. But one thing I've learned in my very short life so far is that for any new technology that people have big concerns about, the market isn't going to adopt it until people are comfortable with it, right? We've seen this in modern medicine in terms of what's being able to be done with our diseases and practices, and people were skeptical of all those at the beginning too, and they just didn't do them, right? But we've become to be more accepted. So I think the storyline here with ethanol is it's not something to be scared about. Like, no one's going to come out and say, hey, we're taking your internal combustion engine and you have to drive an electric vehicle. it'll be something that once people get comfortable with, I think the shift. But I do want to point out that the economic incentives are quickly changing in that direction, right? It's, as I mentioned, oil prices are high. Electric vehicles are coming down in price because they're just easier to make, right? There's not all these moving parts of an engine. The frame of these bodies are very simple as well. And so the cost is coming down very quickly.
Well, and there's so many rabbit holes you could go down within this conversation, and unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap up here here in a second. But another thing is when you have newer markets like that, and it coincides with other emerging markets, thinking of things like carbon credits and carbon sequestration, and how farmers could capture a premium on that. You'd imagine that as the fuel market changes, it would have some sort of maybe impact on the other, but I mean that's mostly just me pondering speculation. So that's your job to figure out, I guess, as we move forward.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, though. I mean, there's these interwoven connections here as well. So.
All right. Well, reports to watch for the rest of the week. We have grain crushings. That's out on Wednesday. On Thursday is the ethanol report. And then this coming Friday, we have an export sales report. So definitely keep an eye on that. If you would like to learn more about the livestock marketing side of things, be sure to check out and watch our friends Megan Grebner and Scott Brown on the weekly livestock market update that can be found at brownfieldagnews.com. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Will Robinson on Brownfield.